Hello, welcome back to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and today's episode is brought to you by Xenium HR, your partner in developing leaders and creating great workplace cultures. Whether you're looking for virtual workshops, on-demand courses, leadership cohorts, or custom training for your organization, Xenium's learning and development programs are built to help organizations thrive. Check Xenium out at xeniumhr.com. All right, let's get into it, because today's episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. I'm joined by Aoife O'Brien, founder of Happier at Work and host of the podcast by the same name. Aoife is on a mission to help people find meaning and alignment in their work, and she's built an entire framework around how to do just that. We talk about her journey from corporate world to entrepreneurship, what it means to find the right fit at work, and how values, needs, and strengths all play a critical role in employee happiness and retention. Aoife dives into her Happier at Work framework, which is all about fostering psychological safety, intentional leadership, and cultural alignment. We also cover topics like why toxic work environments still exist, even though nobody wants to work in one, the hidden impact of imposter syndrome and how Aoife helps people move from doubt to confidence, how leaders can use AI tools and self-reflection to better understand their team's strengths and needs, and what it really takes to build a workplace where people can truly thrive. Plus, she gives us a preview of her upcoming book, Thriving Talent, and shares how her own experiences with misalignment at work sparked the whole journey. If you're a leader who cares about culture, retention, and making your people feel seen and valued, you're going to love this conversation. And hey, if you find value in today's episode with Aoife, do us a favor, rate and review Transform Your Workplace podcast. Share this episode with somebody who's passionate about building better workplaces, and subscribe so you never miss a new conversation. They come out every Tuesday, and sometimes we throw in a bonus episode. All right, let's jump in. Here's my conversation with Aoife O'Brien. Aoife, it is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Brandon. The pleasure is all mine. I'm such a huge fan of the show, so I feel absolutely privileged to be in the guest seat today. Thank you so much for the invitation.
I love it. Yeah, because you host a podcast as well. You're doing some amazing work. This all stems from your corporate life. You transitioned into Happier at Work, and you've got a whole framework around it. Looking at your LinkedIn bio, it's an amazing profile because a lot of people don't structure their profile in a way that it's like you see these corporate jobs. And these breaks in between this, say travel break, and you are jet setter. You are traveling all over the place in between these probably intense jobs in the corporate world. How did the corporate world shape the way you're thinking about work right now?
Really good question. So when I first started my career, I loved work. I was so ambitious. There were two really standout organizations that I worked in. One was in London, one was in Australia. They both had these amazing cultures. And I think I took it for granted. I thought that that's what work should be like. I thought that's what work was like. And then I had experiences of two, let's say, alternative cultures that were toxic. One was toxic, I think, for everyone who worked there. It was quite competitive, quite misogynistic, really high turnover rate. And another one, I think, was just toxic for me. So it wasn't that everyone thought it was toxic. I think it just was an organization where I could not thrive. And having experienced those really positive cultures, and then the juxtaposition with those cultures that were less than positive, it just showed me that I suppose I want to tell people that this can exist, like that you don't have to stay as an individual, you don't have to stay in a role that you really dislike or that you feel is not a good fit for you. But also as an organization, it's your responsibility. And I say organization, I'm talking about leaders here, people in the organizations. It's their responsibility to create that environment that perpetuates thriving at work. And I think those experiences have really shaped my attitude towards how we should perceive work and how we should show up.
It's interesting. You said there was one environment that was just toxic, and then the other one was toxic for you. And what that speaks to me is values alignment. Like the toxic for me is probably like, this is a complete values misalignment. How does like values play a role in employees like yourself at the time choosing an employer, and how quickly can you figure out like a fit for me at all?
Such a great question again. And so if I cast my mind back, like let's say 6-7 years, and if you had asked me, Aoife, what are your values? I would be like, I have no idea. I have no idea, A, what my values are, B, that I could have values as an individual. Of course, I knew what corporate values were. We had the corporate values plastered on the wall. We had them in our email signature. I knew what those values were. But you're absolutely right in saying that I didn't see the alignment between what those words were saying and the behaviors that were expected, that were associated with those words, and how everyone else in the organization was actually showing up. To your point in relation to how quickly can you figure things out, I think in that situation, the first situation that I mentioned that was just completely toxic, within 2 months, I was kind of looking around going, something's not right here, and I can't quite place my finger on it. And that feeling sort of stayed for a while. I really enjoyed the role. I really liked the colleagues that I worked with. And I think just after a period of time, I was like, I'm not going to stay here. I can't stay in this environment. It's really toxic. And because I was working abroad, because I had traveled and I was living abroad, my sense was that they thought, well, she won't leave because we've sponsored her. So much like if I was working in the US, I would have to be sponsored to work there. But they probably thought, well, she's not going to leave because she's sponsored. But I value myself more than
it's toxic in itself. It's like we've got you trapped, basically.
The golden handcuffs, they call that.
That's frustrating, because you've had a lot of different opportunities in the corporate world and then even on your own. Have you seen most companies, are they intentional about their core values and speaking that openly with employees so they know that they can align? Or is it just purely organic and you can just sort of see it happen within like the mid-level leaders where it's like we just sort of adopted values?
I think there's a couple of different ways that you can think about that. So organizations have a culture, whether it's intentional or not. The culture is largely based on the values and the behaviors of people who work in that organization. And if you're really intentional about it, then you can decide this is what we want our organization to be. And in order to be intentional, you need to celebrate and recognize people who are doing really great things and behaving in the expected way. But you also need to call out behaviors that are not tolerated. If you're not intentional about it, if you just let it kind of be organic, you're not really getting in there and deciding how you want the culture to be, then it kind of can become a bit of a free-for-all. So you could have one toxic person there who's bringing the morale down for everyone, who's not held to account. And I've worked with people like that, where an individual was working in our office, but his reporting line was in a different office. So he felt, I think, that he could behave in whatever way he wanted. There'd be no repercussions because his boss wasn't working directly with him. And we had no visibility of his boss. We were never asked for feedback about him and his behavior in the office, his behavior with our clients or anything like that. So I think you need to be really intentional about how you do this, and you need to get feedback from people. You know, like you say, I've been in lots of different organizations, and a lot of them are not that they're not intentional. They know what values are and they talk about values, but they don't necessarily make the link between people's behaviors and how we show up at work and how that's impacting on other people and how that relates to the values and the behaviors that are expected at work. So we might talk about them. And one example I always think of is an organization that I worked in, and one of the values was simple. And this is hands down the most complex organization that I ever worked in. So on the one hand, you're saying we value simple and things that are simple. And it became later, it's not about simple, it's about simplify. And if you want to simplify things, then don't make people jump through hoops and have to send, approval from 5 people away and all of this kind of stuff. Like, it's not simple. So I was about to say, it's simply not what the value was. It just was not how things were perceived at all. And I think the difficulty here is if you're saying simple and the organization is not simple, it kind of makes you think, okay, so on the one hand, if you're saying simple, but the organization is not behaving in that way, or the leaders are not behaving in that way, well, what else are they concealing? What else can they not be trusted to deliver on? So it kind of makes you question everything, as an employee.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with an owner of a business the other day, and we were talking about core values, and they're like, kind of like, why? Like, what's the point? And I'm like, okay, most organizations, they might have like a vision or a purpose, and they, aspirations for 5 years down the road, here's where we want to be. But without core values in place, that's sort of like your North Star. It guides all of those decisions along the way. And like you said, if you bring in a toxic leader, that one person can totally sour the whole culture, especially if you don't have those guiding principles in place that will drive you towards that vision that you want. And so I know you believe in this too, but like just be intentional about the core values and have it guide, because it also gives you permission to hold people accountable to those. And you can interview to those too. So like what I always say is like, we interview based on the core values, so we bring in the right people that align. And then you can also use your performance management system that has core values in it too, so you can hold people accountable to it. So I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, I do. I do to an extent. But what I will say is in that organization where we had that value of simple, that was part of the performance management process. And in order to do that, all you had to really do was come up with one example, when in reality, what you should be able to do, and maybe this is more of an ongoing discussion with your manager as opposed to being captured quarterly in a platform about your performance, but show that on an ongoing basis, you're living the values. And going back to what you said earlier, Brandon, this idea of the mission, like this is what we're trying to achieve, but actually how are we going to achieve it is by living these values. And how do we want people to behave? Is it putting the customer first? Is that one of our primary core values? Are we always putting the customer first? Are we putting employees first and simplify our things simple? Are you trying to do things as efficiently as possible? Are you trying to have fun along the way? Because, not taking things too seriously. Do you focus on excellence? Like, is that something that's really important to you, that everything that you put out there is top notch, really high quality? Are you leading with curiosity? So instead of jumping the gun, instead of blaming, are you leading with curiosity and asking questions about what's actually going on? What's the reason behind this? Are you interested in people learning? How can we learn from our mistakes? How can we learn new technologies in order to improve our business along the way towards achieving this mission? So that's kind of how I would think about it.
When you were in these various corporate roles, you're doing a lot of traveling too, and then you take breaks and do some traveling. But what was the moment you're like, I'm going to go on my own and start my own thing, and you started happier at work? And I want to just hear about that experience and the why behind it and what you're up to now. I know you got a framework. I'd love for you to just dive into that too.
So I had that experience in Australia, and then I had another experience. So those two workplaces back to back. And I just thought, after two amazing workplaces, then being two places back to back, I completely and utterly 100% blamed myself. I thought there's something wrong with me. Why don't I fit in here? Why don't I belong? It was a huge knock to my confidence. It took me years to get my confidence back. And I had a conversation with my manager. In my most recent corporate role, I had two options, and I probably would still choose the same one, although on paper, it's not the best option. So I had two options. I could join the senior leadership team doing a role that I wasn't really that interested in, or I could report into someone else on the senior leadership team and do a role I was much more interested in, much more capable of, and would have really excelled in. And I chose the leadership team, by the way. The difficulty is the person I would have been reporting into and the role itself. I think that a lot of people left that team because the role became very repetitive, very monotonous. So they made some decisions in the business about siloing the work streams that we all had. And so it was a great opportunity for me from a career perspective. But I got to a stage where I was like, I want to do excellent work. And in this role, I don't feel like I can really bring my full strengths. And I did have a conversation with my manager, as I said, and I said, what can happen here? I'm not really happy in the role that I'm doing. And he did sort of look into it, and he made one or two suggestions. And there was talk of having a global role, but being based in Dublin. And in the end, I waited a couple of months. I didn't see any kind of movement. I didn't really want to stay where I was. So I resigned, and I went on. I had no plan. I had nothing lined up. I didn't know what the next move was. But I went on and I did a career coaching diploma, and I did a career coaching certificate and a diploma in executive and life coaching, and a master's in organizational behavior. And so doing the master's was like a real eye-opener for me. It had, my whole background is in data and analytics, and my interest was in the people side of business. So it kind of brought everything together. And when I started asking questions of the lecturers, like, this is what happened to me at work, you know, what happened? What do you think that means? And one lecturer said to me, have you thought about this idea of fit and what it means to fit in at work? So I became obsessed with this idea of fit. What does it mean? And I know people use it in different terms, and it's like, it's not culture fit, it's culture add, and all of this kind of stuff. But I used that whole concept to devise my happier at work framework, as you mentioned. So the first pillar is values. We've talked quite a bit about values. The second one then, and again, if you had asked me a number of years ago, Aoife, what are your needs at work? I'd be like, I have no needs. I don't know what my needs are. So the second one is needs, or I'm kind of changing that language around to drivers, like what drives you at work? And I think a way to recognize where your needs are not being met is when you feel really frustrated. Now, we have three universal needs. Everyone has these needs, and we have unique needs that are unique to us. So the three universal ones are autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Autonomy being a sense of choice and control over what you do and how you do it. Relatedness, a sense of belonging, that you kind of fit in with the people that you're working with. But also, I always like to think of it as the connection between what you do and the impact that you're having on those around you, be that the end client, your colleagues, and the impact that you're having through the work that you're doing, so that your work is actually important and it's meaningful. And then competence is feeling capable of doing the work. And if we take the two examples of autonomy and competence, I like to think, and again, this comes from research, but I didn't necessarily include it in my dissertation, but it's about getting the balance right. So I'm sure people listening have had the experience of a micromanager. I know certainly I have. And when I talk to people about it, you're nodding your head there, Brandon, you get it. So having a micromanager means you don't have the autonomy. You don't have the freedom to do what you want, how you would like to do it, all of that kind of thing. So that's one extreme end. But the other extreme end is when you lack guidance or direction. And if you've ever had a laissez-faire manager who just leaves you to it, who doesn't tell you what needs to be done, who doesn't set clear priorities, who kind of leaves you to figure things out, it's not as detrimental as having a micromanager, but it's still pretty bad. And you're kind of left floundering going, I need to spend time figuring out what it is I need to do here. And so that's also bad. And then on the competence piece, you can have too much competence where you feel, I could do this job with my eyes closed. That's not good. You don't feel challenged enough. And then on the other side, you could feel, I'm in over my head here. I have no idea what I'm doing, and being totally feeling like an imposter. That wraps up the needs or the drivers piece. So I won't go into individual needs because we could be here all day talking about individual needs. But notice where you're frustrated at work. That's a really clear sign. Oh, my boss keeps telling me what to do, and all of this kind of, it all ties in with your needs or your drivers at work. The third pillar then is about our strengths. And again, this is not something, it's something I knew, and probably each individual person has a vague idea of what their strengths are, but it's certainly not something we ever spoke about when I worked in corporate. So to me, it's about knowing what those strengths are, having other people recognize your strengths. So do they know what your strengths are and what you bring to the table? What are your unique strengths? And do other people empower you to use your strengths as well? So you could be spending most of your time actually not working in your area of strength. And I've recently read The Big Leap, and I'm kind of becoming aware of this idea of the zone of genius versus the zone of incompetence. You could be spending a lot of your day not working in your zone of genius. That's also not good for business. It's not good for you because you don't feel gratified by the work that you're doing, and it's challenging and it's stretching you. But equally, from the business perspective, they could be deploying you in a much different way to get better results. So that's the strengths pillar. And then everything needs to be underpinned by psychological safety. And that means that you feel free to speak up, to challenge what's going on. And it's the underpinning, because if you see someone who's behaving in a way that's not in alignment with the values, who are you going to say that to? Do you just kind of brush it under the carpet? Do you not say it to anyone? If you see an opportunity for someone to use their strengths more, if you're in a safe environment, it's okay to speak up and to share that. And then everything is overpinned by leadership. So having the right leaders in place, do those leaders know what the pillars are? Are they able to execute on the pillars? Do they actually want to be there? Do they want to develop people? In my book, I kind of go into the different options, and I talk about this on the podcast a lot as well. Like, there seems to be this path where people think I have to become a people manager in order to progress my career. And I suppose I'm here to challenge that and say, how can we create roles that are more senior, that require more responsibility, but don't necessarily have that people management? Because not everyone is an effective leader. Not everyone wants to manage people. So how do we address that as well? So that's the framework, the 3 pillars: values, needs, and strengths, and then underpinned by psychological safety and overpinned by leadership.
Yeah, I like the underpinning of the psychological safety. Seems like a big one. Like, if that doesn't exist, then everything else is like off kilter, and it probably
it's
doesn't
like the
matter.
Foundation, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I imagine for leaders, the job is pretty hard to figure out. For one, are those needs in alignment? Like, are they off balance? If any of those are off balance, then people are probably likely to leave or be unhappy in their roles. And then the strengths piece is pretty tough too. It's like, are they in the right seat on the bus, essentially? And like, in your opinion or in your experience, have you done any assessments or deep work into figuring out like what strengths people have and then how to put them in the right roles? Seems like that's a tough job.
Yeah, the tough thing is putting people in the right roles. I'm doing some work with the help of AI and for myself first, so I can see how this stuff works. And actually, at the time of recording just today, I've done some stuff for myself saying, okay, so if I want to build this out as a platform, here are my values, here are my needs, here are my strengths, here's my career history, here are my career aspirations, here's my likes, my dislikes, my motivators, all of that stuff. And I fed it into AI, and it didn't come out with just one thing. And I was kind of thinking maybe it will come out with just one thing. It came out with a list of different options based on my preferences. And I was really pleasantly surprised by what it said. It was like based on your skills. And there's another great tool called Sparky Type, which I use, which I'm not sure if you've heard of Sparky Type. And from the Sparky Type, I'm a problem solver. I love to get in and solve problems. I love to gather knowledge to solve problems. That's who I am. That's what I do. And from everything, it was like, oh, you should be working in a consulting firm, Big Four consulting, maybe a smaller consulting firm, or be an independent consultant. And for sharing knowledge, you should be a speaker, you should be an author, you should be. So everything that it said, it was like, yep, yeah, I would definitely do that. I would definitely do that. I would definitely do that. And in terms of the interests as well around HR and HR technology, it just hit the nail on the absolute head. Coming back to your idea about strengths, there are so many tools out there. Some are free, some are paid. I think just taking a test as a start, thinking to yourself as an individual, what do people ask me about consistently? Like, what do people keep asking me about? Where are people asking for my help? What was I good at in school? What did I enjoy doing at school? What brought me alive when I was doing it? What do I enjoy outside of work? What do other people say about me in their feedback? All of these things can help to paint a picture about what your strengths actually are. And the same with needs. I think we don't have the language to talk about these kinds of things at work. And especially if you're working with someone who's a micromanager and you feel like they're micromanaging you, how do you say that in a nice way? Like, there are ways to manage that, there are ways to handle that. But having the language as a manager to say, do you feel like you have enough autonomy? Am I giving you enough guidance? It could be like, you're giving me too much guidance. Give me up to here and I need to figure the rest out on my own. Because different people, along with the kind of finding that balance right, different people will have different levels of autonomy that they're used to, that they like. It will change from early career to late career. tenure, all of that kind of stuff can have an impact on it as well. But I think the difficulty becomes matching people with specific roles. But once we start talking about strengths, maybe it's that someone works on specific tasks within a team. Maybe they have the opportunity to craft their role a little bit more around what they're interested in, around what they're really, really good at.
Yeah, I love that. I imagine you're using artificial intelligence, the tools that are out there. I imagine you could probably use some of those tools to figure out some of your strengths, to do some, like, maybe even chat with ChatGPT or other tools like it to figure out, or have it ask you questions to hone in on your strengths. Have you ever done anything like that?
So that's something I'm actually building at the moment. And I didn't even think that this technology existed. I was like, oh, we can create a form in Excel and you fill it out and you feed that into AI, you feed that into ChatGPT or whatever it might be. But actually, I'm building something that is going to be an interactive. Here are the questions. I'm going to see what the basic version is like. I'm going to then tweak it a little bit to some specific questions. I would love to feed it with information from the book, from podcast episodes, from articles that I've seen online, all of that kind of stuff, so that it answers things in a way that I think is more sensible. There was something trending a little while ago where it was like, hey, ChatGPT, from all of our interactions, tell me what you think I'm good at or something, just to make you feel better about yourself. And it's really good. If you use it on a regular basis, then it's really good at knowing who you are and what you do. I think from the language that you use, from the things that you ask, from what you're interested in. And when I did that, it was actually pretty accurate as well. But now I think I'm looking at something a lot more sophisticated where it will ask questions, people will answer those questions. And then at the end, it will say, and here's some potential jobs. Now, the next step on from that would be, and here's actual job postings that are available, and seeing whether you'd be a good match for an organization or a specific role.
When I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, under your headline, it said imposter syndrome. I don't know if it was expert. I'm trying to remember exactly what it said, but imposter syndrome expert. Specialist. There you go.
Yeah, so I'm not using the term expert.
Expert, or I have imposter syndrome, whatever it may be. So I hear this term a lot. I use it on myself all the time because I have this. I often told people close to me, and now I'm sharing it with the world here, is oftentimes when I'm idle and I'm especially weekends where I'm just not working or doing anything, I'm like, I need to be productive, and I'm not good enough. And I'm like, people are going to find me out, or, you know what I mean? Those weird intrusive thoughts that come into play and that totally diminish what you're capable of. Do you ever feel like that, or have you seen it in other people? And how are you supporting people through this? Maybe even use me as an example.
There's lots of things to unpack there if we have time to go through it. But there's two things that I hear from what you're saying there. On the one hand, it's that I need to make sure that I'm being productive in all of the time that I have. And I think that's kind of a curse of modern times, where if you have any downtime, you need to use that in a productive way. And productive could be catching up on Netflix or I'm reading, but you can't just be idle and do nothing. And that's a perception that we have. And I think we need to break that. It's this whole time is money. And if I'm not doing something with my time, then it's a total and utter waste. I think we need to move away from that mentality. It is hard to do that. I think just to actually spend your time doing nothing, sometimes we just need a break. And I think we need to accept that. The other thing that you mentioned about imposter syndrome, I have absolutely experienced imposter syndrome, and I've experienced it multiple times during my career, and I didn't know what it was. But for listeners, essentially it's more pervasive than self-doubt. It's like self-doubt, but other people are going to find out how incapable I am of doing the role that I'm doing. I just got lucky to be where I am, and the talent police are going to come knocking on my door and say, oh, that promotion, that was a total mistake, that pay rise, whatever it is. We're so afraid that people are going to find us out, and we will do anything we can to cover that up as well. That's the difficulty. And when I mentioned about expert, Valerie Young, she's an expert in imposter syndrome, but she has these 5 different types. And one of the types is the expert. And the irony of the expert is they don't like to be called the expert, because with being called an expert comes all of these connotations. I need to have all the answers. I need to be able to, I need to know absolutely everything. And so you have to have all of the knowledge in the whole wide world in order to be perceived as an expert. And if someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer to it, then you must be a total fraud. And people have found you out because you don't know the answer to a question. That's all the stuff that's going on in our head when this happens. Now, there are different types and there are ways to deal with it. And I started talking about it openly about 5 or 6 years ago. And when I started posting about it on LinkedIn, people were like, oh my God, I have this. And I never knew how to name. And I thought it was just me who experienced this. And you know, people were reaching out to me in the DMs. There were men as well, which I was, I was like, men don't get this. What are you talking about? So many men in the DMs and the comments. Oh my God, I've had this my whole life. I thought it was just me. I can't believe it. And so when I started talking about this and I started speaking about this and I created a program around it as well called Imposter to Empowered. And it's really about identifying, first of all, where it shows up, acknowledging that it is a thing and it's causing an issue, building back up your self-belief. So what are the beliefs that you have about yourself and how do you build up those beliefs again? And then the awareness, I suppose, as well, that when we're taking action from the outside, other people think, wow, that's really brave. You're so courageous. I can't believe you're doing that. That's amazing. You're so confident. On the inside, we feel completely different. We feel out of our depth. We feel, I don't know what I'm doing. People are going to find us out. And I think if we realize this, that when other people take action, they don't feel confident necessarily. But by taking those small actions, we can build up our confidence to take bigger and bigger actions. It all starts with the small actions, that if you're courageous enough to take those small actions, and from the outside it looks like, wow, you're really brave, but actually on the inside you could be terrified. If you take those small actions, then they start building and building and building.
Yeah. I got 2 more quick things for you before we go. You mentioned your book several times. This isn't out yet, right? You're still
It's not
working
out. No, it's not even. I haven't even finished writing it yet.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the book. We've probably covered some of the stuff, but you have a title? Like, what can we expect in this book?
We have a working title. So I'm planning to call it Thriving Talent. And it's based on the Happier at Work framework, which we talked about. So I go into much deeper dive into each of the different areas. And I have to say, I've loved the process of writing the book because it's kind of forced me to explore in much more granular detail all of the different aspects of the Happier at Work framework. What works? What additional things do we need? What else can be addressed here? Is there any gaps in it? Maybe, you know, like I haven't covered career stuff in the Happier at Work framework. Is there a place for that? Or is that something that's completely separate? Imposter syndrome, I sort of touch on, but again, I think I would probably do a completely separate book just about imposter syndrome because it's that big of a thing, both in my business and also in the world. Like it's a huge and separate topic. So it covers the framework. Essentially, what I want to do is get it into the hands of the people who need it. So the global talent leaders, the HR folk, the leaders who need to read this with a view to, this is a framework of how you can think about things. This is a framework for you to use to become a better leader, to lead your talent in a different way, as a way to ask questions, as a way to lead with curiosity, to help people to understand themselves and to help them to manage their own careers, but also to create that environment that I think we all deserve to work in. And I think this is the funny thing, because who wants to work in a toxic environment? I don't think anyone does. And yet toxic work environments exist. And that's what I can't really get my head around. I'm like, if no one wants to work in a toxic environment, how are we allowing these toxic work environments to prevail? You know, are there people who are staying there who don't believe that they can do something else? Is it an us and them thing where, like, I'm on the us now, so I don't mind about them because I'm in the group that has the power and I'm a decision maker? You know, all of these different kinds of things. I've gone on a bit of a tangent, which is not necessarily related to the book, but these are the kinds of topics I'm quite interested in exploring. So the book is very much based on what I talked about, an exploration of the Happier at Work framework, but how to apply that practically in the workplace. And I haven't done it yet, but I'm looking to do interviews with some of my clients, with some global companies who are doing really great work in the area specifically of workplace culture.
I love it. And then your podcast, it's got a big following. How many episodes do you have? Like, what kind of guests do you have? Like, just share, anybody who's listening who's never listened before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, just tell us about it.
When I introduce it, I talk about it as being a career and culture podcast for people first leaders. So anyone who cares about people and leading people, but talking about topics relating to career and relating to culture as well, how to create great workplace culture. A lot of the guests are authors or they're psychologists or they're coaches, but also practitioners who are putting this stuff into practice as well. So there's a nice mix of different people who are either doing this stuff or they're helping other people to do this really, really important work. I'm coming up on a 250 episodes now, so it's a lot. Not as many as you yet, Brandon.
It's tough. It's a lot of. I don't think people realize the work that goes into
No, I don't think so.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a huge amount of work. The way I can think about it is it's my legacy now, isn't it? Like, it's not something that's going to go away. I don't know how our podcast is going to evolve over time. I'm kind of thinking back to VHS tapes that existed when I was younger. You won't see that now, but because podcasts are digital, I imagine it will just evolve over time. We're getting much more into video and things like that now these days. And I do have YouTube that I put my podcast onto YouTube as well, but who knows how podcasts will evolve.
Well, Aoife, this has been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I know we've been talking for a while, and I'm so happy we're able to do this. Keep up the good work. Where can people connect with you or just learn more about your work if you want to point people to a certain place?
Yeah, so 2 places. Since you're listening to a podcast now, definitely go and search in your podcast app for Happier at Work. You should find mine, should be the first one that comes up, hopefully. And the second place I would say is LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I absolutely love it. Let me spell my name for you, though, because if you're listening, you may not be able to find me. I'm sure the link will be in the show notes, but just in case, it's spelled Aoife. That's Aoife. And my surname is O'Brien, O''Brien.
My guest today has been Aoife O'Brien, founder of Happier at Work. It has been such a pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Brandon. I so enjoyed this conversation.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.